Chapter 6, Section 2, and the big idea here is that the Constitution gives the legislative branch, Congress, the power to make laws. See today expressed implied powers. These are the powers granted by the Constitution of the United States. We'll look at the elastic clause. That is kind of a catch-all in terms of what Congress is actually able to do. And then we'll look at some important limits that Congress has, as well as a number of checks and balances they have over other branches of government. So the first thing I want to think about is, what is the most important function of Congress? I mean, legislative branch of government means laws. And so perhaps that's the most. It could be any of those, however. And so I want to unpack what making laws looks like and what powers do they have in making laws. First off, what does the Constitution say about it? The expressed powers are the powers that Congress has that are specifically listed. Congress has the right to make laws expressly, as stated in the Constitution. For example, they can coin money. That's one of the powers they have. They could make infinite money. They could destroy our financial system. They are in charge of our financial system. They also support troops. They're the ones who decide how much soldiers make. They're also the ones who decide ultimately whether or not we go to war. They also regulate commerce. And that means they govern the commercial activities in our country. They oversee free trade. But wait, that's socialism. Well, that's what Congress does. They oversee trade to make sure that it happens properly. They also deal with foreign countries. It is the job of Congress ultimately to make decisions that affect trade with other countries, that affect relationships with other countries. Now, the president is in charge of foreign policy, but ultimately those big decisions have to go through Congress. They also collect taxes. Whether the taxes go up or go down, we often blame directly on the president. But the president is only part of that. Congress actually makes the budget, deciding how many taxes we should collect versus how much money we should spend. The president has to agree on the budget, or he could choose not to, and Congress may override him. Again, those are the expressed powers. That's, if you read the Constitution, that thin little book, it says Congress does those things. But what else can Congress do? Well, there are also implied powers. These are powers that are not stated specifically in the Constitution. Well, that's interesting. There's things the Constitution says that Congress should do, and then there are things that are implied, meaning it doesn't specifically say it, but Congress is still supposed to do it. So what are some of these? Well, here's a big one. Allow, quote, necessary and proper actions by Congress. When the Constitution was written in 1787, people weren't flying airplanes, were they? Well, when the Wright brothers tested their airplane, and within a decade we were dropping bombs out of them on people, true story, we suddenly needed an Air Force. No one had ever heard of a plane, or even conceived of one outside of maybe Leonardo da Vinci when the Constitution had been drafted. But suddenly, people are dropping bombs out of planes, and we got to start thinking about that. And so Congress created a whole new branch of the government called the Air Force. Again, not specifically stated. There's another important one, the elastic clause of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress the right to make all laws necessary and proper to carry out its expressed powers. Yes, there are limits to Congress's ability to make laws. There are. Congress cannot make a law that contradicts a constitutional amendment or article, not without changing the Constitution. Although Congress does have the right to change the Constitution. Congress cannot make a law that goes against the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution. You know, for example, the Supreme Court has interpreted the 14th Amendment as necessitating an integrated society. So Congress can't make a federal law called segregation law. They don't have that right. They don't have that power. They do have and now they could make an amendment to that effect, but they're unlikely to. And they do have the power to make any law, again, as long as it doesn't contradict the Constitution, that meets its needs in carrying out its powers. And so when you think about it, that necessary and proper clause and that elastic clause allow Congress to do an awful lot of things and have allowed them to evolve over the years. Well, guess what? Congress also has a number of non-legislative duties. You know, when we meet our representatives, the biggest thing they'll tell you is, yeah, we make laws. You know, our state representative was in the Apple parade. He was riding a convertible. I don't know if you saw him, but he posted his picture to social media. Cody Brown was there. While he's not making laws, he rides in the Apple parade. Go figure. He has a symbolic role, just like other politicians do. Well, those are some of the non-legislative duties of Congress. But more importantly, they serve as a check on other branches of government. Congress has the sole authority to impeach the president. Impeach means to formally accuse a government official of misconduct in office. It's been done twice in our history, and it can only be done by Congress. So, you know, for example, Robert Mueller's investigation has shed a lot of light on a number of issues, but currently the case is still underway. You know, there's a House Judiciary Committee that is overseeing the investigation, so when he publishes his reports, he will report to that committee of Congress, and they will ultimately decide whether or not this should lead to impeachment proceedings. And so after the House votes to impeach a president, the Senate then hears the case. They act as a jury. This has only happened twice. And neither of the two times did the Senate vote to convict. Nixon likely would have been impeached, but he resigned before it could have gone that far. And the Senate has to convict a president by 2/3 of the vote. Also, kind of a big deal, only Congress can declare war. The War Powers Act, passed by Congress in 1972, limits the powers of the President of the United States. The President can send troops wherever over the world, anywhere, but must inform Congress within 48 hours and must get their permission within 90 days. It allows the President to act quickly and decisively, but yet serves as an important check on the President's power. Other limits to their powers. Remember that Congress cannot violate the Constitution unless they rewrite it, and that's creepy, but there are specific limits to Congress's powers in the Constitution. For example, they cannot suspend the writ of habeas corpus. This is a big one. It's Latin for of the body. And it's a court order that requires police to bring a prisoner to court to explain why they are holding this person. You have a right, a constitutionally guaranteed right, to know why you are in trouble. And you have a constitutionally guaranteed right to explain yourself. All that is stated clearly in the Constitution. And obviously, Congress does not have the right to overturn that. Congress is also prevented from passing a bill of attainder. Once more, you cannot punish a person for a crime without a trial or a fair hearing. You have a right to tell your side of the story, and you have a right to have your side heard by a jury of your peers in a fair, speedy, and public trial, once more, all stated clearly in the Constitution. Congress cannot pass an ex post facto law. This is Latin for after the fact. This is a law that would allow a person to be punished for an action that was not against the law when it was committed. Let's say that we passed a law against blue shirts. Wearing my green shirt today, but Jamie's wearing his blue shirt. Jamie didn't know that it was against the rules for him to wear his blue shirt today.
Too bad, we gotta hang on.
But now we have a law. Sorry, Jamie, I know that you didn't think you were breaking the law this morning, and technically you weren't. But now we have a law against blue shirts, and now Jamie's in trouble. That would be an ex post facto law, and that is clearly unconstitutional and an important limit on Congress. Okay. Other checks and balances.
Lucky today, kid.
Congress can pass a lot of different laws. It almost feels like they have, when you think of what a law means, well, that's a policy. They can create policy. They can pass any kind of policy you can think of with those certain limits. And the Supreme Court might decide that something they are trying to do is unconstitutional. And this is a big one. Guess what? The president can also veto a law. The president can veto a law. And the president does exercise this right, especially when Congress is controlled by the other party. So let's say, and who knows, let's say that the Democrats take over Congress in November. Well, that would mean that the Republicans control the executive, Democrats control the legislative, and this is bad for productivity. And it means often that the president will dislike laws passed by Congress because they represent the Democratic Party. And he will likely begin to use the veto a lot more.
So stupid.
Well, if 2/3 of Congress are controlled by the Democrats, so if this is a sweeping change, which maybe, we'll see, but if it is, they might have the necessary 2/3 majority to override a presidential veto, which has happened numerous times in our country's history. For example, Reconstruction. Andrew Johnson hated Congress. He wanted to control Reconstruction. Congress wanted to control Reconstruction. And after the midterm elections, Congress took it over. The president vetoed everything they tried to do. They had the 2/3 majority to override his veto. They basically shut him out, and then they impeached him.
Sounds like
It's hardcore. Perhaps most important limitations, for example, just in summary, Congress cannot violate the Constitution. The creepy thing is they could change the Constitution. They're the only ones that has the right to do that. But it takes a super majority, a 2/3 majority, which makes it not simple.